Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons being the 800-pound gorilla, and the recent breakdown by Professor Dungeon Master over on Dungeon Craft. I think he's got like 70 or 80,000 subs. He's a major source, highly respected within the industry, and he's got his finger on the pulse of Dungeons and Dragons. And when he says something, it matters, right? And so what I'm doing today is I'm doing credible source reinforcement, saying, hey, what I've been telling you for a year and a half, here's a credible source saying exactly the same thing. All right, with maybe a slightly different angle, and then I'll just correct the angle to say, hey, this is well within the proximity of my point that I've been making for a while. So basically, my passion and what I've been trying to sell is that Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, Dungeons and Dragons Now, should always be your 51% game, your primary game. I get tons of pushback on it, right? And I've learned, here's a good example. There's a movie about the Branch Davidians, the Waco guy. He was like a cult leader, right? Paramount Pictures made an absolutely spectacular series that explained everything that happened at Branch Davidian. And I lived through the Branch Davidian crisis. It was very upsetting and highly frightening that people could be swept up into a religious fervor and then they would be harmed. And it happened right here in America. It was an American tragedy. So it was very upsetting, and it took me a while to kind of just wrap my brain around what had happened, right? But so Paramount Plus made this thing, and they put it on their honestly at the time quite rinky-dink streamer that nobody watched. It's getting some traction now. I think Paramount Plus gets watched, but it's not Netflix, right? So when the branch so basically here's the thing: this amazing piece of art was placed on Paramount Plus, right? And nobody saw it. Nobody cared, right? But when it dropped on Netflix, millions of people watched it. It was the same content, the same point, the same piece of art, but in one place it didn't matter, and in one place it matters, right? So what I'm telling you is, you could be a 100% right, but if you got 1,800 subs, it's not going to matter until somebody with 80,000 subs says it, right? And here's the issue. Here's the other thing. You might think I'm upset about that. I'm not. You know why? Because I know who our greatest presidents were. One of our greatest presidents was Ronald Reagan, and he said, a man can accomplish anything as long as he doesn't care who gets the credit, right? And that's the point. I don't care about, being said, hey, Scott, you're right about Dungeons & Dragons. I care about the Dungeons & Dragons community growing. And if the Dungeons & Dragons community is going to grow, it's going to grow because people are playing Dungeons & Dragons Now, the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, not because people are paying D&D copy and D&D then. So that's why I care about this so much. So let's get into this, all right? So Professor Dungeon Master did an absolutely amazing, really fantastic breakdown on why Dungeons & Dragons is the 800-pound gorilla and why it really is playing at a different level than any tabletop role-playing game in the world, right? And he talked about 6 different points. And I'm not going to break those down and give you all those, right? But I am going to link to the video below, and you should definitely watch it. You don't need to watch it to get the point of what I'm saying here, right? So basically what he said is Dungeons & Dragons, for 6 different reasons, is able to dominate, and not only any tabletop role-playing game on the market, but the entire market, right? And when you're done listening to this, it's very clear that Dungeons & Dragons is not competing to be the best tabletop role-playing game. It's competing to defeat every single role-playing that exists simultaneously. And that's exactly what it's doing. It doesn't function as a normal game. It functions at a level that no other tabletop role-playing game in the world functions at. And frankly, it's so large, and when you're done listening to Professor Dungeon Master, it's hard to not understand this. It's so large, right, that not only is it, that it really is carrying the industry. The industry doesn't really have a future or a structure without Dungeons and Dragons right now. We're not at a place where any other game can do even half of what Dungeons and Dragons does, right? And so Professor Dungeon Master does this amazing breakdown and gives 6 reasons why Dungeons and Dragons does not compete with any tabletop role-playing game in the world. It competes with the entire industry simultaneously. It's that much of a juggernaut, right? And I'll just give you one of the points. He said it's an ecosystem, right? Like, it's like iOS and Android, right? Phones are some of the most powerful devices on the planet right now, and they only really run on 2 operating systems, Android and iOS, right? And really, between those two, actually Android is the major winner, right? There's far more people that run on Android than iOS. But, basically you're looking at a situation where who's the winner, right? Who is the real winner between these, right? And so that's the issue, is, just getting to and the other issue is, like, when you decide what phone you're going to have, right? If you're in iOS, you don't want to switch to Android. And if you're in Android, you don't want to switch to iOS, right? Because it will affect 100 things in your life, and it's the same thing. And this is huge, because I have left games behind because I realized what Professor Dungeon Master is saying now. I realized it 2 years ago. The game I love is Index Card RPG, but I would put it in front of players and they thought it sucked. Not because the game sucked, the game's amazing, right? But because they're like, hey, this ain't an ecosystem. This doesn't have a Matthew Mercer. This doesn't have rules that everyone understands intuitively, right? And right out of the box, because literally they've seen it played on television, right? Like, these other games just don't play at the level of Dungeons and Dragons. So this is a credible source reinforcement, right? He's acknowledging the 800-pound gorilla. He's not saying that that's the reason it should be your 51% game, but I am. I'm taking his 6 reasons and saying, you are never going to find, also VTT and online and YouTube. I'm just remembering the different ones in it. Let me see it. So he said VTT, YouTube, Mercer. He said ecosystem. That's 4. That's 4 out of 6. And the rules. 5. The rules. And there's like one more that I'm just is not coming to the top of my head. But he's like, and the thing is, any of your copy games, they're not going to have these, or the versions of these that they have are so shriveled comparatively. Like, who are you going to put against? Who's your game going to put up against Mercer? Mercer is internationally known as a celebrity. You got a celebrity playing your copy game? I don't think so, right? Like, you got a celebrity game celebrity playing your D&D 1E, D&D 2E? I don't think so. And even if you don't, nobody cares, because we got 10 times the celebrity playing the now game, right? Like, and way bigger celebrities, right? So that's the issue, is your game just cannot compete. And until it does, and so Professor Dungeon Master over on Dungeon Craft is acknowledging the 800-pound gorilla. And what I'm saying is, because it's the 800-pound gorilla, that's why it should be your main game. And the reason it is the main, and I'm going to add one reason to Professor Dungeon Masters, the most important reason, and it's totally okay that he forgot it, right? And that the reason why is he's not a Gygaxian, right? He's just a dungeon master, right? I'm a Gygaxian. I understand what Gary Gygax accomplished, right? And as a Gygaxian, the one thing there's really 7 reasons. Your game is not coming from the originator's legacy. The originator's legacy, Gary Gygax's legacy. He spoke with Dungeons & Dragons 1E when he was on this planet, right? He speaks with Dungeons & Dragons 5E now, right? And he will speak with Dungeons & Dragons 6E then, in the future, right? And that's the issue. This is why your game Your D&D then, your D&D copy is never going to get there, right? And get this, Professor Dungeonmaster said the same thing. He said the odds of any game catching up are slim to none, all right? So I'm just pointing to a credible source saying what I've been saying for 2 years, right? That D&D is the main game, and I'm going to add to that and say that's why it needs to be your 51% game, so that you honor Gary Gygax and you keep D&D where it should be, Queen of the Hill. That's my opinion. What's your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.